I am so happy to be speaking with you today.
It's a pleasure to meet you in person. Are you in Los Angeles?
I am. I have been such a fan of the films that you have produced and been involved in. Spy Intervention, I thought, was so much fun. I love that film.
Love that. I agree. It's a very fun film. Really fun film. You know what, though? It was a very unique film, and I learned so much. I made studio movies. Then I started making independent films because I love artists and viewer talent. And they're very different animals. Making and marketing an independent film is completely different than when you have a studio behind you.
You've gone from Enchanted, and that's all studio power behind that. You've been involved with Salt. Premonition, another one that I really liked. It was really unique.
Absolutely. And by the way, even Premonition today is a bit of a cult classic.
Yes.
It still plays on Netflix. It's one of those films where we got a lot of criticism, yet it's lived. And I that makes me so happy.
It's a film that it's a pay attention film, as I like to call it. It's a pay attention film. It's not a no-brainer. It's not something that's just fun and kitschy and cool like Blast from the Past, which is still one of my all-time guilty pleasures. You have such a diversity in the films that you choose and get involved with. And I love that because each one is done, and you can see it, is done with such care and says something different. You're not pigeonholed.
I mean, you're speaking exactly to what my passion is. Every one of these movies, from Enchanted, Salt, I developed very early on. I'm an old-fashioned creative producer first. The big ones, the little ones, they're all scripts. Enchanted, I literally created from scratch, with the writer. Salt's a very early draft that we crafted, but it's very important to me to try to make, really good artistic films that are also super entertaining. I want both in my movies. That's what I, aspire to. I don't always hit it to the level I want to, but that is what my passion is, because I love movies like Star Wars, Sound of Music, Terms of Endearment, Gone with the Wind, Titanic, Forrest Gump. I love, quality entertainment. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and the great thing about the films that you have overseen, Sunil, the production values are always high production values. Nothing is schlocky. Everything, you dot the I's, you cross the T's. You give us films with good cinematography, good stories, excellent performers, excellent performances. You leave no stone unturned with these films where your boot's on the ground, such as with Last Survivors. You and Drew roped me into this sucker. You and Drew, your director, Drew, roped me into Last Survivors with the very first frame. The cinematography grabbed me right away. That denatured, in a sense, a post-apocalyptic tone, but not that gritty, which I found really interesting. Drew working with Julian Estrada, the DP, you have that grayish, that denatured gray, but the grit that is so often associated with apocalyptic films isn't there. So it immediately heightens your interest as to, all right, what is this going to be?
100%. And by the way, I got to give a shout out that shooting on location in Montana helped with that beautifully. Julian did a beautiful job with that Montana natural scenery, and all of it was shot on location in Butte, Montana. The only stage work we did was the interior of Troy's cabin. Everything else was the elements, and I agree. It's beautiful.
Oh,
and then we intended it to be beautiful. Because again, it's what you were saying earlier. How does this movie be unique and differentiated? Like, again, I want to try and make movies that the audience is surprised and entertained and they think about after. Again, you don't always succeed, but like, let's aim high. And with this one, we really wanted, in the middle of COVID, COVID surge last year, 2020 December, going to Montana and just getting this film in the can. I'm so fortunate that we were able to pull it off.
Well, you kept your cast to a minimum. You're in a remote location. You did everything you could to observe protocols, make filming as easy as possible so you could tell a story and get it made. And you guys pulled it off. You really did, Sunil.
I really appreciate that. We learned so much from doing the other independent films. And again, when we got to this, it's funny, and I can tell you because you saw Spy, the one criticism that Mylrea got on Spy that really annoyed him from some, not all, was that he wished the movie didn't look at times, cheap. And he was very intent with production design, costume design, cinematography, lighting. We would march up a hill, shoot Drew Van Acker on the secret spot, march 1.5 miles in the freezing snow back down, and then go back up to shoot it in the afternoon to get the lighting perfect.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much love and care from Julian and Mylrea to make sure, everything was perfect. And yet, it was a, 18-day shoot. We had all these COVID protocols. So it really was artists who basically said, all we're doing this December in Montana is anything we can to see what we can, make from this. It was kind of beautiful to watch. I wonder if we pulled it off had it not been the pandemic. Isn't that ironic?
And I wonder that with some films that I have seen that were shot during the pandemic, because I've really seen a lot of creativity come forth. And the whole idea of smaller is better. Smaller and minimal resources often brings out more creativity.
Well, absolutely. And independent films versus, say, Salt and Enchanted, and I'm so lucky we did our sequel to Enchanted this year, Disenchanted. But when you have a bigger budget, money can solve problems. At more modest independent budgets, it's creativity. And I think there's something utterly beautiful about our creativity and our ingenuity as humans. As you can tell, the movies I make like to explore human nature in some form or the other, but I'm fascinated by human nature and how when you have nothing but your ingenuity and creativity, what actually manifests. I love watching that in making films.
Well, what you also have a tendency to go towards is a fish out of water kind of scenario. We take a look at Blast from the Past.
Yeah.
They're in an underground bunker. We take a look at Last Survivors. Okay, they're hiding in the woods in a cabin with no humans around, and if you see a human, they're a mutant, so you got to kill them. Very Christopher Walken in Blast from the Past. They're all mutants up above. So I see this, even Spy Intervention.
Yeah, Enchanted. It's a fish out of water from the fairy tale.
Uh-huh.
Maybe, and I'm not saying this is the case, but maybe, I came here from India when I was 3. My parents immigrated, and, maybe there's a little bit of the fish out of water that I find fascinating. I love culture clashes and people with disparate points of view coming together. Whether it's a movie like Pretty Woman, whether it's, the movie Blast from the Past, obviously very much so. Along those lines, about 3 days into Alicia's shooting, she goes, "Do you know what this movie reminds me of?" And I'm like, "What?" Blast from the Past, the thriller version.
Yeah, no, she's absolutely correct, because as I'm watching Last Survivors, I see the similarities in the construct, in the story construct, in the approach, right down to, Troy and Jake's cabin, very contained, self-sufficient, much like the underground bunker in the backyard in Blast from the Past. Very self-sufficient, growing things inside, hydroponically. Here you've got to go find berries because there is some wildlife outside, but still it's very contained and self-sufficient.
You're absolutely right. And I'm just thinking this as you're saying this, and also I'm so version to the outside world.
Yes, very much so.
And again, that may be a little bit coming from India when I was 3, and my parents they're lovely. They're retired doctors, but they were very much like, they didn't know what America was. Remember, in the 70s, we didn't have all this technology. So when you're coming to America, it really is a different vibe.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a bit of that that's influenced me. It's very interesting.
But I see that, and even in Premonition, again, in very, very disparate worlds as Sandra Bullock's character is grappling.
Absolutely. And taking those journeys. And again, it's as I get older, the thematics, Blast from the Past, it has a lighter touch by the time we get to Last Survivors. There's some very dark, interesting, we were fascinated by this idea of humanity versus hatred and how you can be so hateful towards humanity that you lose your own humanity with all 3 characters struggling. And it's something in the world, it's something that really fascinates me,
And I have to say, I think this is one of the meatiest emotional performances that Alicia has gotten to give in her career.
She's so good. They're all 3 of them, and even the 2, Mark Famiglietti and Ben Arthur, who play Alicia's ex-husband and the cop. We got, and again, maybe this is the pandemic, Alicia gave it her all. That scene in the diner, I won't give too much away. I remember just coming up to her after saying, Alicia, you remind me of like a combo of a young Sarandon meets his face. It is so good. And I agree. She's really, really impressive.
I watched the confrontational scenes, the initial meeting between Henrietta and Jake, who Drew Van Acker just plays so beautifully. We really see the innocence and naivete of the cloistered life he's had in a cabin in the woods with no humans around because they're mutants. You really see that, but Drew also, the more he interacts with Henrietta, the more Jake interacts with her, Drew brings this, we see the realization of he's been misled, things are not what he was told. And Drew has this great ability in holding his face, having an expression, even his body of like being stopped in his tracks almost, because of the realization of what life really is. And it's fascinating to watch from a performance standpoint. Absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. I want to say along those lines, we definitely intended by that scene where, without giving any twists away, but we actually would say that our movie isn't really a twist movie, but a kind of early reveal, and that the audience at times may have a different perspective of Jake, and that it's fascinating to watch that interplay between those 3 characters, where the audience may or may not have a little bit more of a sense of what's going on. So but we never intended it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I don't want to give too much away, but it created a very interesting chemistry between those scenes, between Jake and Henrietta. And you have to remember, we're doing these in 5-degree weather in Montana snow. And you're just so grateful that your actors are so method and present that you're getting it done in a decent amount of takes. You have no idea.
Then we get Julian's beautiful camera work capturing some of the goal of the magic hour, the golden sun on Henrietta's little yellow house, and streaming through that upstairs bedroom annex window. And it is so stunning. It's warming, it's welcoming, it's a gorgeous structural metaphoric contrast to what we have in the woods with Jake's life with his father, where we don't see the sun breaking through the gray, tall, 50-foot tall trees.
Very intentional by Julian. And by the way, he'd be so happy for you to hear that, because if it was up to him, we would have only shot half the movie in magic hour. So it's really awesome that you noticed that, because that was something. These are, again, every little detail of this movie, they were very deliberately planned by Mylrea, Julian, the cast, all of them, and so absolutely. And And there's a beauty to it. Again, the movie, it's very important to us that this movie ends with hope. It's, we talk a lot about that. There's a big debate on the ending. I won't give too much away, but we want to leave the audience with not answers, but hope. And I think hope is what makes the world go around today. We need hope, more hope in the world.
Yeah. And you definitely do. The film ends on a very hopeful note on multiple levels. So that really, the third act, and then when we get down to the final climactic scenes, really, we see the one scene where we have the melding of Henrietta's world with Jake's world and how that helps bring something to pass in that third act. Everybody can learn from everybody. It's all human connection.
I mean, look, we just all went through a pandemic. Human connection is so beautiful, and that is what this movie, it's don't isolate yourself from human connection, because despite the world being difficult and dark, and I feel so strongly about this, like, don't hide away from the world, but it's so easy to, like, even making a movie, there's a moment we can make it, it's all come together, but, like, there's a pandemic, and do we have enough, money in this? How about we go? And we went. And we went to Montana, and it was just such an adventure. It's, I love the idea of you just never know who you're going to meet, what you're going to do. And I'll tell you, for the cast, Alicia had such an amazing time playing this dramatic character. She loved playing Henrietta. And again, I wonder if it wasn't a pandemic, if this would have all come together like this.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how the irony of life works,
How did this project even come to fruition? You're re-teaming with Drew Van Acker. You're re-teaming with Drew Mylrea. Re-teaming with Alicia. How did this particular film come together? Did Josh Janowitz have an idea for a story and come to you, have a script? What was this process like?
I developed it from scratch, a few years back. And at one point where they're trying to make a bigger movie, it's hard to make bigger movies with newer writers and newer directors. Right after Spy, Mylrea read it, loved it. Van Acker read it separately, loved it. And I'm like, guys, we got to do this again. It took us a minute to sort of put it together. Moyer and Alicia both read it. Obviously, I had made a movie with Alicia. I had met Stephen Moyer a few years back when Tom Cruise was attached to Salt, and we did table read with Cruise. So I had a relationship with both of them. They flipped over the script. It came on hold. We're actually going to make it, ironically, in Georgia, in the woods, no snow. And then the pandemic hit, and then it sort of all came back together, where both Moyer and Alicia had, like, a very limited availability in December. And I was like, in independent film, you go out and raise the money, and it looked like the money had come together. So we just, we went for it. And that's sort of how it all came together. But we also wanted to, I learned a lot from my previous independent films. And this one, I don't know if you're aware, but we ended up world premiering last October in London at Fright Fest in Leicester Square. Then we played at Leeds International Film Festival. And even to see our tiny film world premiere, and Van Acker, I, and Moyer, and Mylrea, and Julian, we all went to London for that premiere. Alicia couldn't make it because she was shooting a Justin Timberlake movie, but it was just such an incredible thing to see our film sort of catching on,
Mm-hmm. It is a film, it's a thriller, but it's so much more than a thriller.
It's a character drama. I mean, the marketers would say that for a marketer says we have to call it a thriller or sci-fi thriller. And even Fright Fest said to us, we do thrillers, sci-fi, and horror. We're not a horror festival by any means. And your film was so different, we wanted to play it. But it is really, do you agree, kind of like a dramatic thriller. It's a character piece. It's an intimate character piece.
Yeah, it's not a crime thriller. It's definitely a dramatic human interest thriller that sets up scenarios that I think after the past few years with lockdowns, I think will be very relatable to people.
I totally agree. And, I always, as I said, and you have a thematic or a similarity. All my films have a storybook quality to them, which I love. And yet I also think it'll be very relatable, but also I hope for the audience, very entertaining. I want to entertain as much as I want to educate. I want both.
All right, I can honestly say that every film of yours that I have seen has entertained me. Every
I
single
love
one.
that. I love hearing that, Debbie. That's awesome.
As I said, with Spy Intervention, I love that film.
Yeah.
I had so much fun watching that film. Salt, I like Salt. Enchanted, I love, and I can't wait for Disenchanted. Oh, I can't wait for that.
And even that, the fact that Enchanted, I mean, I developed that script from scratch, sold it in a bidding war to Disney. It wasn't initially at Disney. Making that movie and seeing it become a bona fide classic makes me, I'm just so humbled by that. I love that. I love that it lives and lives and lives. And that's partly why we made a sequel finally, is that Disney, there's just no argument. It's become a perennial classic. It's still, they just, everyone watches it, everyone shows their kids, and that's why I make movies. Salt has sort of become a classic, action classic too. And Premonition and Blast cult classics. I think Spy will have a revival. I think. I love the movie. I'm very proud of it. Like, we all learned a lot. Again, when you have a smaller film, sometimes it's just harder to get something to catch on when you don't have the weight of a studio behind you, and that's sort of the challenge in an independent film. Which is why we're very, again, excited about sort of, none of us thought when we made The Last Survivors, this is where it would all kind of, again, like each step of the way, but it's awesome. And every time someone says they like the movie, it still, to me, makes me so excited.
Well, it should. You worked hard on it. I'm really curious, Sunil, you have this great collaborative coalition around you. Josh, he wrote and directed Lifelike. Van Acker has now been in multiple films. Drew has directed Drew has directed multiples for you. And then Alicia, what is the magic of going to the well and all of your collaborative minds working together to come up with films like those that you're putting out?
I love working with the same people over and over again. I mean, even things like, this is minor, but our hair and makeup on Last Survivors did my film Divorce Party and Lifelike. Like, if I like and think someone is super talented and an artist, and that's probably my gravitation, is as long as people are an artist as well, I get commerce, and I get doing things purely for business. I want both. I want business and artistry to combine. So when I meet people who have that passion, artistry, and talent, I'll work with them again. I don't have the itch. How do I say this? Like, if I know I love a restaurant, I'll go there again. I don't have the itch to see if there's something better if I know something is good. It's just a personal thing of mine. Van Acker, he produced this with us. He produced Spy with us. He was so instrumental in helping this get made. It's, maybe I'm telling way too much here, but his agents at ICM also represent Stephen Moyer, which is incredibly helpful. And so there's all these sort of synergies that we create to, make these movies happen. And I love meeting you writers, directors, actors as well. I'm not opposed. It's just sort of like, but if you have something in front of you that's amazing, why not do it?
Mm-hmm. Well, and even with Mark, he's got a small role here as Officer Sharma, but Mark has written a film for you before.
He wrote two films. He actually wrote Divorce Party and Spy Intervention. He co-starred, had a good supporting role in Divorce Party. By the way, he had a supporting role in Lifelike, and again, the funny thing with Mark is, and we're so impressed with his performance in this. The actor who was going to play that cop actually got COVID 2 days before he was going to play.
Oh.
And you have no idea where you're like, what do we do? It's an 18-day shoot. I'm like, Mark, could you get on a plane tomorrow morning at 3 a.m.? So it's like 5 o'clock right now. And he said, give me a minute to call you back because he has kids. He's like, yeah. And he came. And it was amazing. Like, and I can't imagine a different cop than him. Sometimes it all happens, for the best.
Yeah, he's so good in this role. Of course, I've seen him in so many things, and he's always good, but I really like him in this role as Sharma because he
Yeah,
brings care and concern, but not overly. Not,
absolutely. All of our actors in this movie are grounded with their point of view.
yes.
They all brought such presence. I like character actors or performances where people become a character versus play a decent version of themselves. It's just, and again, there's nothing wrong with playing a decent version of yourself or a good version of yourself, but I love when you transform. I obviously know Mark very well. Nothing about him in real life is that character. Nothing about Alicia, Moyer, or Drew are these characters. And I love that they all, and again, maybe because we were all at the Copper King in Butte, Montana, we weren't allowed to go out. It was very much like all you're there to do is work. Everyone really dove into their role in a beautiful way. I mean, it's, all that, let's all go out. It just, none of that was happening because of COVID. So they all really, really dove in beautifully. And by the way, a lot, as we're talking about that, I mean, look at the difference between Van Acker and Spy and this. It's
Yes.
completely different roles.
I mean, absolutely amazing. Amazing. How involved do you get in the post-production, Sunil? Particularly with this one. Okay, with Brad McLaughlin's editing on this one. Because the editing here, you've got to balance the worlds.
Yep.
You've got to balance the tone and the worlds. And so that's why I'm just curious how involved you get with that editing process.
I mean, look, I'm on all the movies, especially from Premonition on, where, Premonition, Salt, and Enchanted, I'm there every day. Like, those movies were my babies, and all the independent ones. Brad is such a strong editor. He comes from having, his favorite movies are like Network, all that jazz, Apocalypse Now. He learned to edit. He's a young guy still. He learned to edit on film. So he has to, he thinks how he's going to edit it before he edits it, because in film, it's a pain to re-edit,
Yeah.
cut and all that splice stuff. And we had long chats about what this movie is, and, the world building in the beginning. And, we only have 18 days of footage, so you also don't have, there wasn't 6 different movies in the can. There was sort of like the good version, the middle version, and the not-so-good version, but we talked thematically a ton about it. Bradley edits for character and performance and story. That's always his gut instinct, and I believe he has a lyricism. The way he edited Julian cinematography is just almost like a musical instrument.
Yeah, I know, it's beautiful. I love the editing because this is the kind of film where you could, if it's not cut right, you could so easily lose your audience if you stay too long in the quiet of the world without mutants, or a semi-naked Drew Van Acker there. Nobody's going to argue looking at that. How much white and gray and snow and trees, and that's all there is. How much can you see before you lose interest? And I love the balance that Brad has here.
He's again an artist, and we're very lucky to get him. He just come off editing Palm Springs. He'd done the final cut of Palm Springs. Various. He's a really established editor, and that kind of goes to my point, which is fascinating about the pandemic. It was easier to get him to do this within what we had because, January 2021, we're neck deep in the pandemic, and, he was free to do this. And he is very much an artist who balances pace. Early on, he probably was trying to make it even faster paced, and we were a little bit like, what, on this one, we don't want it to be slow, but we want to feel the world. There's so much beautiful camera movement Julian did.
Yeah.
Feel it. It's almost like a painting Julian created with very grounded characters within this tableau. And I, so appreciate the way he edited. And then I just have to comment too, I think our composer, cinematographer, and our DP all kind of found a synergy, but they never really worked together. Yet each of the artists working separately kind of brought something which I thought was really, it makes it sort of very beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of Julian's as a DP anyway. What he did for the boys, for the boy behind the door, and the gin is just amazing.
Yeah,
The,
he's such a talent, and
yeah.
he's gonna. I mean, he lives in Peru most of the time. We keep saying move to LA. He is genuinely just such a talent, and what a amazing thing where like Mylrea, called him up in Peru, and he jumped on the sword saying, "Guys, you have to travel this guy from Peru to do the movie. There's no one else who can do this."
No, I mean, he's the perfect person. Just reflecting now on what he did with the boy behind the door, just incredible with the lighting and the inkiness and the tone, the visual tonal bandwidth that he creates. It's masterful from an emotional standpoint and a visual standpoint. And in many instances, you feel like you're looking at a painting. It's so glorious.
I couldn't agree more. And I told him about 2 days into production, this is such a beautiful painting, almost like a Road to Perdition, like a movie like that back in the day. Yet the performances are so real and grounded from their unique points of view. And by the way, that's what I think the magic of movie making is. You juxtapose those ideas with, again, very sophisticated editing, and that's how you get this sort of like seamless, it all comes together despite, all the issues we had making the movie and various things and snowstorms in the middle of production. And there you have such a cohesive, beautiful end product. Julian also has no fear. He shot in snowstorms. There's a scene where Troy takes Jake back to a secret spot. The snow is going. I think in the movie, it's so beautiful to look at. But that was our last day of production. We had to walk up that same hill we'd walk up 2 miles in a snowstorm. And that was a whiteout snowstorm at negative 10 degrees in Montana. And yet they still got everything there. And Julian there's just no fear in him, which is amazing.
Well, now that begs the question, Sunil, is there fear in you as a producer when you're shooting in conditions like that? Is there fear of damage to the equipment?
I mean, I'm probably extremely more concerned about safety first, equipment second. But yes, I'm very much about you got to keep people safe. There has to be tents here, all these different things. In every which way. So yes, you're very concerned about those things because you don't want anyone to cross those lines in any way, shape, or form. I'll give you a little, there was a big debate of, Drew swimming in the hot springs. Real hot springs, there was no place where Drew could come out of the water and warm up. It was like a mile away from a road. I'll tell only you this little secret. I was like, I'm so concerned about safety. Location is important, but safety more. We ended up shooting a hot spring at this resort about 10 miles away from our hotel, and then we used visual effects to bring it all together.
You've got to, because when it's that cold, no, you can't have him trudging naked through the snow for a mile.
No, and it's that kind of stuff that I would just put my foot down on. I understand, but also I'm okay with younger directors and DPs and everybody wanting that. My job is, I'm the veteran here, so and we all got along really, really well, and it's again all of us, in London, we're just so impressed that all of that, created this.
Another aspect of this film that I took notice of that I really liked is the sound design, especially the sound within the white world, within the forest. The sound is some of this had to be production sound and not looped in afterwards, because you really get the reverb, you get the faintness, the echo. I love the sound in that white world, in the forest.
Absolutely. Look, sound is everything. The wind, all of those sounds. A lot of it was production sound. A good amount of it was production sound. But again, it was this beautiful irony that when we went to our post-sound house, they fell in love with the movie. They actually said, we're not making a movie here. This is artistic. And so they got really into it too, which is a little bit of the fun of making a movie that everyone's working on it actually likes, because they just want to give it their all. But yes, sound is the wind, the owls, the feeling like you're in this utopian nature is so important. even the colorist we have to do the final color correction, he was an artist. And we just got a lot of passionate artists who, you know, they were like, yes, I'll do this, you know, and it was lovely to see the final product that way. It doesn't always work like that.
Well, it certainly worked this time, let me tell you.
I so appreciate that.
I've got one last question for you, Sunil. This is so lovely talking with you about this film and your work in general. But one last question. I'm curious. You give us the great gift of getting these films made and giving them to us to watch. You know, what is the gift that producing, storytelling, what does it give you?
For me, initially, I love the enjoyment of seeing that gift given, because I had that gift growing up. When I was 7 years old, I saw Star Wars 4 times in the theater. It meant everything to me. It was like the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And that joy I love giving, it's really, really gratifying. And I remember even our first test screening of Blast from the Past, the audience really liked it at the test screening. I didn't need any of them to know I made the movie, but it was really gratifying. As time goes on, that's still most of it, but I love giving opportunities. You know, when I meet an actor like Drew Van Acker, like a few years ago, he was like, you know, give me a role that challenges me. Or Mylrea, who was a newer director. I love giving the opportunity to newer talent as well to, like, show their wares. And, you know, I get to be the veteran, experienced guy colliding with this real idealism, talent, and passion. And I love that, too, these days. I love making movies. It's such an adventure.
Well, I'm so glad that you make movies, because I love the movies that you make.
I love hearing that and really appreciate that.
Well, this has been an absolute joy, Sunil. I hope we get to speak again, maybe for Disenchanted.
Absolutely. I hope our paths cross again. It's a pleasure chatting with you, Debbie.
Thank you, Sunil, and you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.